This episode is brought to you by Padaris, empowering transport planners everywhere. See padaris.com/podcast for details. I don't think we need to go back beyond to 2011, when my guest started as Associate Director at David Hicken Associates, or DHA, where he now presides as Director of Transport, but certainly a highly credible and illustrious career history and a well-earned title, I'm sure, although we may just find out. Simon Moon, welcome to the show.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, brilliant. Simon, let's talk about first, if we can, that moustache. Tell me that's Movember, and from the first, I assume, no cheating?
It is Movember, and I will put my hands up. I have cheated. I look to avoid that awkward, fluffy bit at the start, and I've gone straight into the embarrassing handlebar. Yeah. So I'm just going straight into it and embarrassing everyone I can.
Yeah, fantastic. Is that wife approved as well?
The other half has quite strong opinions on it. I probably can't say on this podcast how she describes it. It wouldn't be appropriate, but there certainly is a strong view.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, outside of consultancy, my research tells me 25 years playing rugby at a reasonably high level, I hear, including 10 years. Also racing speedway bikes. Probably not the two sports you would naturally combine. What's the details behind that?
Yeah, you're right, Ben. They're not really natural kind of bedfellows. They're not two things you normally put together. You certainly tend to have different builds and different types of people doing with two different sports. The speedway started when I was very young. I got dragged along to Eastbourne Speedway when I was about 6 months old. I got bribed with hot dogs and burgers and such like from the shop. And I suppose inevitably, when a small track opened at the back of the main stadium, I wanted to have a go. The parents, I think, thought that I'd fall off once or twice, it would hurt too much, and that'd be the end of it. Never do it again. 10 years later, I was still riding. I got contracted to Reading initially at Eastbourne. I then moved to Rye House, which is a team top of London, and rode reasonably successfully to the point where it just wasn't really viable to do around life, around university and looking for a career. But did manage to achieve Riders' Rider of the Year, an accolade which was also achieved by another rider who rode for Rye House some years later, who went on to be a world champion. So somewhere in a dusty cupboard somewhere, there's a cup with my name on it and a world champion.
Yeah, I would have thought you would have bought those out, actually, Simon, and had them just behind you on the wall, just showing them off with the rosette as well.
I should have had them just in the background, I think. But no, I couldn't find them, sadly. But moving on to the rugby really came along. Sorry, Scott, I was just going to say, moving on to the rugby, it really came about when I couldn't ride anymore. I needed something to fill that gap. And rugby offered that opportunity for something which had a bit of danger, had a bit of intrigue to it. And I picked it up when I was at university, played for Lewis to start with, moved from Lewis to my home team at Crowborough, played for Crowborough ever since, and then moved probably more, if I'm honest, into a vet side now, as I'm starting to get a bit older. Duct tape, sticky tape, deep heat, anything I can stick myself together, keeps me going. And allows me to play, at a decent level. Played at a national vets tournament recently where we were playing Scotland and Wales. So, good fun. A little bit sore at the end of it, but really good fun.
Yeah, I bet some of that I think was for charity as well, isn't it, Simon? I know you're a big believer in that.
Indeed, yeah, absolutely. The national vets tournament is raising money for a charity called Wooden Spoon. It's a children's charity. It looks to raise money for disadvantaged children, and every year we manage to raise tens of thousands of pounds for them. So it's a good cause and not just a bit of fun. Once a year for a run out or whenever we can.
Yeah, well done to you. Let's kind of try and bring it around to transport if we can. Transport planning. Where did that begin for you in your life? Was there a family influence or something outside? What brought you into transport planning?
I think it all started for me with the engineering side of things. When I was younger, I was forever sticking bits of cardboard together and put bits of stick on them and turn them into more and more elaborate piles of dust collectors, I suppose. And I think my parents probably stood back and thought, well, what's he doing now? There's all this mess being made. And it was really me kind of inventing things and coming up with things. And I went from there, I went through school. Never had a great interest in school, if I'm honest, but did go to a careers fair at the end of secondary school. And what came out of that was I should be a marine engineer or civil engineer or electrical engineer, mechanical engineer. And I suppose after that day, I sat back and thought, well, off the back of that knowledge, I should probably be an engineer. And ended up going to college. Went to a tertiary college in Lewes, which is quite a big turning point for me in actual fact. There's one or two lecturers there, and I don't tend to remember people's names very well. It's one of the things I'm a little bit rubbish at. But I think it's Victor was one of the lecturers there, and he kind of just said, look, you're doing it all right, but you can do better. Engineering is your thing. Just embrace it. And I did. And I got through university, and I came out the other side and thought, I've made it. I can do this. And from there, I suppose, like a lot of people, coming off the crest of the wave, thinking I've done something I didn't think I could do, I was a bit lost. I almost then fell into a situation where a friend of a friend of a friend's brother had a director in the consultancy industry. And they said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you come along and work for us? And it was titled a graduate role. It's probably more of a lackey role, really. I think the graduate term at the moment is probably a bit more glorious than what I was doing at the time. Folding up plans, going and buy sausage rolls on a Friday morning. But my MD at the time, great chap, he said, you know what, you have got an eye for this. This is right for you. I want to put you through an MSc. And he told me, basically, you're going to Imperial. That's where we're going to put you. And as a kind of slightly green graduate, a bit wet behind the ears, I thought, that sounds nice. Let's do that. That sounds very pleasant. And I got to Imperial and I turned up and they're handing out canapes and champagne and they had a 4-piece band. And I thought, this isn't Kansas anymore. This is starting to get a bit real. And I survived that, got through Imperial. And I suppose, as I say, the rest is history. Just went on and forced a career.
Yeah, super. I love hearing about the influences that your either tutors or teachers had. I think we've spoken about this on the podcast before. I was heavily influenced in my early days by a couple of teachers. I won't name names, but certainly stood out, and it's good to hear that we've got some people out there looking after the children of tomorrow. Let's begin by discussing, if we can, Simon, your perspective on development planning in light of perhaps growing significance of resilience and adaptability within today's planning landscapes. Can you perhaps elaborate for us on how you've integrated these principles, or your preferred terminology, into your development planning strategies whilst maintaining functionality and efficiency for the clients in the midst of challenging or ever-changing conditions, which I think we can probably all acknowledge right now?
Yes. I've listened to a number of the podcasts and I think there's a number of really good views on this. And I wouldn't disagree with a lot which has been said. My own personal take is I think as an industry, there's quite a jarring effect. I think as professionals, we all know where the industry should be, where it should be going. Many years ago, obviously, there was the predict to provide technique. We then moved towards looking at sustainable transport. And we're now moving towards visualize and validate, where we set how we want people to travel, and then we look to make sure that does happen. And I think as consultants, we know where that needs to go. The industry knows where it needs to go. Officers understand it. And then almost at the other end of the spectrum, we're working with members, and quite rightly, members have to represent the local community and their constituents. The problem with that is their views may be quite different to what the industry thinks and knows we should do. So somewhere in the middle, at one end of the spectrum, where as an industry, we know how we should be promoting sustainable transport, and at the other end of the spectrum, where people have slightly different views and may want to use their cars more, we're meeting in the middle. And I think this can cause frustrations, delays, and it's a difficult path to navigate. It certainly causes problems on some projects. You look at areas such as London, where TfL is very progressive. They look at to see how we can promote sustainable transport, active travel, but the boroughs and their members may be more focused on parking and cars. So that that marriage somewhere in the middle, I think, is difficult and adds frustration to the industry.
Simon, could you provide insights into a particular project you've worked on in your career where you've effectively tackled an intricate transport challenge? What were the fundamental strategies or the inventive solutions you utilised, the thought processes involved, and what valuable takeaways can professionals in the field draw from your experiences?
I think I'm going to use an example here of a project I've worked on in the past. It was a good few years ago. It was a large secondary school in Eastbourne in East Sussex. The school was relocated and it was amalgamating other schools as well onto one site. And local officers and people in the community were concerned about the impacts the school would have and how traffic coming to the school would cause problems with the local highway network, understandably. From my point of view, schools aren't trip generators, they're trip attractors. Those trips are actually already on the network. This is what we assess when we look at new residential schemes. So the trip's already there, particularly in this case, given the fact that actually we were moving the school and we were bringing other schools together. So we looked at this slightly differently. We acknowledged the fact that actually there would be what I would call a hotspot around the school because everyone's gathering, everyone's coming to that, whether it be on foot, bicycle, bus, car. And we needed to work out how that could work effectively from a drop-off point of view and how we could promote sustainable transport in that location. But actually on the wider network, where a lot of the concerns were focused, we looked at what the existing base flows were. We looked at how the trips were distributed out to the existing schools. We could then take off those trips from the base flows and load on the new trips to the school. And this actually showed that across the network, through different junctions, yes, there was an increase in trips in a certain direction, but there was also a reduction as well. So the net change across the junction was negligible. Obviously, if you take trips off one arm, you put them on another, it frees up capacity. And as long as that junction still has capacity in it when you assess it, actually, this is a far more accurate way of looking at things because you're looking at the net change. And from that, we had a favourable result. We managed to get the school through the planning process. And this is certainly a technique I've used on other projects as well. I worked on car park projects in Kent, where exactly the same thing. We're relocating and amalgamating small rundown car parks into new car parks for visitors to come to the area. And by looking at this in this way and then using this analysis, we can show actually the net change wasn't anything to be too concerned about. And I think what I take away from that is actually think around the problem. And it's not, I don't think we're cheating the system. We're not trying to hide anything. We're just looking at it in the whole and looking at it from a holistic point of view.
This episode of Practical Perspectives is brought to you by Padaris. Planning, engineering and stakeholder engagement seamlessly integrated into the cloud. To discover how Padaris is helping the likes of Arup, WSP and Sistra plan smarter, faster and more collaboratively, head over to padaris.com/podcast today. So, I can only imagine in any transport or design project, it's essential to interact with a wide range of stakeholders, including communities and, I'm guessing, local authorities. Could you recount an incident in which you effectively navigated diverse interests or conflicting perspectives to deliver a project that met the approval of all parties involved? Additionally, could you describe your general approach, if you have one, in those certain situations?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because we work in an industry where we are people focused. And I've said this many times before. There was a chap a good few years ago, called Sir Isaac Newton, and he was reasonably famous for saying, "I can predict the movements of the heavens above, but I can't predict the movement of man," or something to that effect. And I think as transport planners, that's quite poignant because not only are we trying to predict what people are going to do, where they're traveling to, from, how they're doing it, but we're also engaging with people and we're trying to understand what makes people tick, what drives people, what is making them emotional about the changes we're proposing. So it is a tricky industry in that regard. And again, I can think of one particular example of a project we worked on where there was many different stakeholders. It was a site in Medway. It was for a large secondary school. It was for also a large residential development and the conversion of an existing barn, which was historic. It was listed needed to be reused to save falling into the ground, and converting that into a wedding conference venue. This particular site had, as I say, many different stakeholders. There was the landowner, there was our client promoting the site, there was also the contractor looking to build out the school. The area had a bid fund coming forward at that time, and there was an organisation within the local council running that bid fund. They had their own consultants. The local officers are also obviously involved, and the contractor building the school had their own consultants. So there was a myriad of different people with different interests, all driving at this from a slightly different direction, whether it be making sure the bid funding was coming forward, making sure the school was being built in the most effective and cost-effective manner. With us, it was obviously looking to achieve planning permission and move that forward for our clients. So there's a lot going on there. And we managed to get around this by talking to people and actually realising everyone is human. Everyone has a view and an agenda, and there's no good banging the table and beating the drum and say, you have to do this. You have to understand where everyone's coming from, work with them. And in particular, from my point of view, when we were going to these meetings and we were taking into account all these different views and slightly conflicted positions, really understanding the evidence and the data and the modelling, because from that we could very definitively say what our position was and make it clear that actually we were taking into account everyone else's position to come forward with the best solution possible. So I don't think there's any one kind of general solution or way forward. I said, this is how you have to do it, except for probably just know your data, know your information, and understand what's motivating other people.
Sure, sounds good. Perhaps, Simon, you could share with our audience a historical project that truly pushed the boundaries of your professional capabilities, perhaps a challenging problem that thoroughly tested you and your team, and of course, ultimately the outcome of this experience.
Yes, there certainly is. And anyone who knows me and knows my history, my career, will probably know exactly what project I'm talking about. And it's a project I think that actually, who know about it, they almost talk about it in kind of whispers, in dark corners. And it's almost similar to when you tell your kids, if you don't go to bed, the bogeyman will get you. This project, I think, is similar to that. If you don't do your work properly, this project will come and get you. It was tough. And I think I earned some stripes off the back of this. I certainly had some cuts and bruises at the end, but I think you learn a lot from that in actual fact as well. So it was a site in Bromley, again, a secondary school project. I tend to work on quite a few school projects, so they're good examples to pick on. We went into it, and I don't think we went in blasé, but I think we saw the site as being in a really good location for a secondary school. It's surrounded by what I refer to as chimney pots. It's got a lot of houses around it, so it's a good location to put a school. It was next to another school just on the road, which was going to be a partner school, so they could work together. It was in a good location. The area was considered, yes, it should be a place for educational facilities. However, after starting the project, it was quite quickly realised actually this was going to be a toughie. This was not going to be easy. The local community were very well informed and had money to put efforts behind their views that this school should not come forward. Local officers were possibly not quite as strong in their views in terms of policy and transport planning, and the political view as a whole in this area was tough. And it was very clear right from the off, actually, as soon as we started work on it, as I say, it was going to be a difficult project. It ended up going to committee, it got turned down at committee. We then twin-tracked an appeal, which was written reps, along with a second application. The second application went through at committee. As the Section 106 was being signed for the scheme that had gone through, the written reps came back and the appeal went down, so it wasn't allowed. This dragged the second application back to committee, and off the back of the new information, it got turned down, which then drove it to a public inquiry. The public inquiry was a week-long public inquiry, had me on the stand, I think, for about 7 or 8 hours over the course of 2 days. And, they're tough public inquiries. They are almost intellectual bullying in the nicest possible way. You have to do it because you have to get to the nuts and bolts of the case, but they are hard work. And I'm really glad to say we got through that. It was tough because it was focused on transport, and being the only person standing out there puts you very much in the limelight. You are really in the spotlight. But we got through it. And we got the result just before Christmas. And I, in a very geeky way, joked just before Christmas, this is the best Christmas present I'm going to get this year. And possibly if you're really dull and boring, you could turn this into some kind of drama, into some kind of planning film, because it did have so many twists and turns. I was very, very fortunate. I had a good team working with me at the time. We literally worked day and night beforehand to narrow down what was being debated in the public inquiry. We got it down to actually just a few points by working really hard. And, that was the big takeaway from me on this. Never underestimate a project. Much like when I was rock climbing, you never underestimated or overestimated the climb until you actually got onto it. It could be a lot harder, a lot easier than you think. And also work hard with your team on these particular projects. That work you put in beforehand can narrow things down so much. It just makes life so much easier.
So, young transport planners often seek practical guidance to advance their careers, and I think that's why we've named this podcast Practical Perspectives. In your opinion, what skills, whether technical or interpersonal, do you regard as most crucial for achieving success in this industry? Moreover, perhaps, have you noticed any specific areas where there might be a skills gap that need to be addressed?
I think in terms of skills gaps, it's tricky to pick up on just one particular aspect in actual fact. I think as transport planners, we have to be very rounded individuals. I think we have to know a bit of everything. I don't think there's any good in kind of going to a meeting and say, well, I just write the reports or I just run the models. I think we have to know a bit of everything. I think my experience in recent times is actually having people in the industry who understand design as well, because particularly at the moment we live in a physical world. We still move around, we still interact with people, we still have to drive places, we still get on trains. I know some will have us believe that AI will mean that we all sit in a corner and computers will do everything for us. That may well happen. It's probably not something I quite subscribe to yet, but we do live in a physical world, and being able to design things so they work, I think is absolutely critical. And I think that's probably the area that actually as an industry would help us to focus on. And from my own personal experience and views, it's really nice when you work on a project and you come up with the calculations, you come up with the analysis, and that feeds into the design. And then actually a few years later, or hopefully sooner than that, you see the design built out, it's on the ground. And if you got it right, it's working well. And then it's allowing people to move around and interact effectively and efficiently with each other.
Yeah, it must be quite rewarding when you see them come to fruition months or years down the road. On that there, Simon, just going further, can you tell me a piece of perhaps valuable knowledge or perhaps an insight that in your role may not be a common knowledge, but is nonetheless essential? What are some aspects of transport planning that perhaps tend to be underestimated or overlooked that deserve more attention?
It's a tricky one because there's lots of different areas where you could say, well, this particular information tends to be misused. People pick up on this analysis wrong. People maybe undertake surveys not quite the right way. So there's lots of different bits you can pick up on. I think I would probably cast my mind back to some analysis work I've done in the past. I completed it as part of my dissertation for my MSc, and I've also had it published in later years as well in different magazines. And it's actually kind of sticking by hard and fast rules doesn't always work and isn't right. And actually the particular case I'm thinking about is what we use as walk distances and standard walk distances. And I think we're becoming more fluid as an industry in this regard. But historically, certainly there's been a hard and fast rule that says people will walk X meters to get to a location. And the research I've done in the past shows that simply isn't the case. The different environments will affect how people will walk. Different densities affect how people travel, even just down to the kind of different demographic. So actually, when we're looking at how we can unlock land and how we can promote sustainable and active transport and how we can bring forward necessary developments, simply say, actually, right, the rules say no one will walk further than this to get to a bus or to a town centre. It's not right, and it's not always that that focus. You can actually look at the local environment and say, actually, if you make it pleasant and you make it easier to walk, then people will. And I think where the industry's going, where we are assessing things more in terms of those softer elements, what is the walking environment like? I think it is going in that direction, but maybe just something to bear in mind for people coming up through the ranks, that actually these hard and fast rules in terms of walk distances aren't always totally accurate.
No, I get that. Simon, please share with us one distinct or significant piece of guidance that you offer to new team members, perhaps something you hope that they will carry forward to the next generation.
I think there's a few things here, and obviously as you start out, there's so much to take on. There's absolutely huge amounts of information, both technical and also how you interact with people and how you kind of develop those softer skills as well. I think rather than going into any precise piece of information, say, you must do this, you must apply this particular piece of software in this environment, I think a couple of bits that I would offer up as general bits of information to help you through your career and hopefully get handed on is, over prepare for things. If you're going to a meeting or going to a hearing, really get under the skin of the projects. When I was training more and playing more rugby, the phrase was train hard, play easy. And I think that's so true. If you turn up and you know your subject inside out, the client will recognize that you know it inside out and they will respect you for it. And you don't want to be caught on the back foot where you're suddenly scrabbling thinking, crumbs, what is the answer to this? And it's a tricky environment. You do get sidewinders coming in. And again, as I said, we work in an industry where we work with people, we interact with different stakeholders, and people will come up with strange questions. And because of that, you will get knocked down, you will get beaten up at times, but actually learn from that and move on. And one of the great things that someone said to me in the past, one of my first chairmen, was that there's no success which will last forever, and there's no failure that can't be mended. And that's so true. You're only judged by your last efforts. And if you do mess up, learn from it, move on. And I think the way, as I said, to not mess up in the first place is over prepare, really get under the skin of the project, give a huge level of attention to detail and commit yourself to it. Absolutely commit to your project. Don't just kind of gloss over it and say, it's only a small TS, that's all right, I can just get away with it. Live it and breathe it.
What's next for Simon Moon and or DHA Transport?
It's an interesting one. I mean, it's the world is ever changing, isn't it? And I've been caught out so many times before where I've set myself kind of target views and places I need to be. And all of a sudden you turn the corner and you get smacked in the face and something new comes along. And actually, in a strange way, sometimes those things which are most difficult, you don't see coming, are actually the best because they cause you to rethink, take a new strategy and go somewhere else. So I suppose it is a bit of crystal ball gazing. Who knows what the future holds? From a personal point of view, I spent some time in the Himalayas a few years ago. I went to Everest Base Camp. Absolutely fantastic part of the world. The people and the culture are amazing. You won't find nicer, harder working people. So I'd like to go back to the Himalayas. I'd like to climb something big. So I need to try and fit that in. Certainly not getting any younger, so I need to do that soon. And in terms of work, at the moment we are growing another team in West Sussex and other offices as well. We're looking. We do have an office in London. We're particularly focusing on the transport team in West Sussex at the moment, which is growing. We're going in the right direction. So long may that last.
Yep. Simon, as always, I can't thank you enough for your time, effort and input in contributing to the show. I think people learned so much from this. I know, like the others, you're an equally busy man. So thank you so much again for your effort and what you've had to say. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks for listening. Today's episode of Practical Perspectives has been proudly supported by Podaris, the trusted toolkit empowering transport planners everywhere to plan faster, smarter, and more collaboratively. Experience the future of transport planning today at podaris.com/podcast.